Stay away from me, Gia. I'm no good for you. Just like Twilight, the graphic novel.
Alright, so yes, we both sat down and we have now read Twilight, the manga. Stop it. Alright, where do we even begin? Let's talk a little bit about the story for the, 6 people out there who don't know the basic concept of
Twilight. It's pretty easy to not know what actually goes on in Twilight because everyone knows to avoid it. It's like if you don't drive a car...
Well, but you do know, of course, that, Bella falls in love with a vampire named Edward. Mm-hmm. Pretty much everybody has that. Most people also know a couple of things that don't actually pop up in this book, so we don't have to talk about them.
But yeah, so parents are divorced, mother's getting remarried, and so she goes to live with dad in the middle of Hoboken nowhere.
Actually, it's in Washington, in the Pacific Northwest. She was originally in Arizona, so very different climates. And she talked about oh man, I'm so totally awkward, I'm totally gonna have trouble making friends, and all of a sudden, bam. Everybody wants to be her friend. She has
new hot girl.
Making friends. I found that a little disconcerting, a little disingenuous, perhaps.
You're attractive, and you're from the big city in Arizona. I like how she has that valley girl. She's like, oh god, I've come from a metropolitan area, like Arizona. I don't know how I'll adjust.
Phoenix. Phoenix is actually a city.
I've been there before. I'm aware of how many cactuses there are.
Cacti.
Cactars.
Alright, back to the actual content of the manga. I will give it, the art is actually very pretty. Bella is the prettiest not pretty girl I have seen in some time.
I don't think she's not pretty. I think she's just pretty. There's just prettiness going on.
But they make a solid point that she's kind of supposed to be off the beaten path somehow. But you never actually see that. Except for her weird willingness to overlook the fact that her suitor may also want to slaughter her. She's fairly normal to be.
She has kind of a played down thing going on, that she's got this real, depressing, but just kind of down to earth. She's not into a lot of the frivolity, that is going on.
Yeah, she's kind of emo. She's kind of like, man, everything's kind of lame.
Everyone likes to hang out and hold hands. That's so pointless.
But we get everything from Bella's perspective for obvious reasons. I mean, Twilight is essentially a self-insertion fanfic, and Bella is not really supposed to be all that exciting. Edward. I want to talk about Edward. Edward is, of course, the vampire who Bella falls in love with. It takes her the entire book to figure out that he's a vampire.
Quick, if you were to say 2 words about Edward, if you had to describe Edward in 2 words, what would they be?
Can both words be sparkly?
Sparkly, tastic.
Sparkly. No, what I was going to say is, Edward is the vampiric equivalent of a human being who cannot decide whether he wants to eat his filet mignon or fuck it.
The entire time they're going through this thing where you think he's this absolute jerk, then finally he admits that he stays away from her because he just cannot resist. He just has to eat her. And then he's always afraid he's going to lose control and just pounce on her and drain all of her blood till she's dead. But he's also kind of jonesing for her. He's got a soft spot for her.
He wants to protect her, and he also wants to eat her. He's playing with his food. I mean, really, the guy... I'm surprised I haven't seen a little bit more talk about Edward in these kinds of terms. The man is kind of fucked in the head. Granted, he's a vampire, but you don't see the other vampires having issues with this. Although you kind of wonder, why are they in school exactly?
Good cover stories. They have to stay in school because they're several hundred years old, and
they all look like they're 17. 17-year-olds can usually pass for 18 pretty well.
No, this is a book. They're supposed to be 14, and they look like they're 18 or something. I don't know.
Speaking of the book, I think we need hardly say that the lettering is pretty god-awful in it. I think the internet as a whole has already talked about that. That
was where I started, and it took me the first few minutes to get beyond how terrible the lettering is. It really feels like it came straight out of a book. A book. It feels like the fonts come out of a book, the bolds for this, the that for that, and I guess that's what they were going for, because this is supposed to be straight off the book. This is supposed to be Stephanie Meyer's vision.
Yeah, and it's, they released it in hardcover. It is very much made to look, this could be a text novel. If you didn't already know, if you didn't say graphic novel on the front. But it is not. And actually, even though I like most of the art, there are a couple of things I noticed. A lot of the backgrounds are actually touched up photographs from the look of it, which is fine. It's a stylistic choice, I guess. Although also it's really played down, so you don't really notice it. So you're kind of like, oh.
See, I didn't even notice that the entire read.
Yeah, well, look here. Okay, you got this picture, and I'm not quite sure how I'm going to show it to you. I guess I'll just have to scan it. But you can see that car. That is not a hand-drawn car by any stretch of the imagination. But you don't really notice that a lot if you're not kind of looking really close.
We're so used to the black and white prints on manga that all manga is pretty much done is black and white with the exception of a few color inserts, that it's kind of interesting to see that the entire thing is color. It's just almost entirely black and white.
Well, it depends on... Some pages have touches of color, like Bella Has a Dream that is decidedly red tinged. And actually, some of the art on those pages is some of the worst, I will say.
Trust
I'm
me,
thinking particularly
Bella.
of this one panel that I'm looking at right now that has... That first shows Edward in Bella's dream with fangs, and he looks kind of dumb.
I'm
Sorry.
Team Jacob. Sorry. Jacob makes his cameo in here.
He
and I'm
would
Team
like
Jacob.
the super long hair.
Yeah.
And there are a few other, like early on, when she's still in Phoenix, they kind of have sort of a brownish yellow tinge and things. They put a lot of print quality into the book. She tries a couple of times, the artist, Young Kim, tries a couple of times to use screen tones, and sometimes it works better than others. I think her art style is really at its best when she's just working with her kind of sort of sketchy style, because sometimes the screen tones really don't work. And I don't like what she used for the sense of, like, when he has this clenched fist and she puts kind of these little marks around it. They looked really weird to me.
My favorite part, and people who listen to the podcast would have noticed this, but my favorite part is when she's awkwardly staring near them and she's sitting there, you see the lines and it goes shuffle and onomatopoeia, and then it's got her holding her hair to her nose going sniff. Sniff?
I actually did look at that, and I am actually not totally convinced that is an N. I think it could actually be an H, and so it's a motion.
Oh, that's a sniff. She's got it all the way up to her nose.
It could be an H. It could totally be an H. How many girls do kind of do something like this with their friends so often?
And
so
that's what makes her unique. She sniffs her hair. That's
I don't
what
think
sets
it's
her
a sniff.
about.
All right, we'll show you the panel, and we will let you decide if that is a shiff or a sniff.
Or a sneak stab.
I'm no good.
You're no good for me.
All right. What else have we got? Anything?
Like I said, and sometimes the color accoutrements worked really well for me. Like when they talk about his eyes, and there's a sequence where the only thing that's colored is this kind of unnatural silver on his eyes that really stands out, or brown, or whatever. He's got moodstones
He doesn't
for
even remember,
eyes.
but it was really cool.
He's got moodstones for eyes. They change colors.
I will say, just in terms of like looking at this on its own, having not read Twilight and all that, the structure of the story totally doesn't necessarily do it for me. She jumps very quickly from being kind of like mystified and mildly concerned by this guy to like, oh, I'm totally in love with him.
Which is actually the caption.
I get it now.
It's the caption. Instead of actually conveying that with stronger emotions, there's, I'm totally in love with him and I can't help
There's
it.
a lot, and again, this is based on a prose novel, so maybe it's not that surprising that they would do it that way. But there's a lot of telling, relatively, not as much with the showing.
I liked it though. I felt like she kind of had this every girl kind of feel to her in the fact that we spend so much of the thing looking at kind of her monotony.
John was fantasizing about being her. True story. The end of the book, this is not a plot spoiler, but at the end of the book, Edward ends up lifting her on his back for reasons that will go undisclosed. And I had this moment. It's Inuyasha. Okay, seriously, Edward, Jacob, and Bella could very easily be compared. Stop it. Always trying to show me up. Edward, Bella, and Jacob could totally be compared to Inuyasha, Kagome, and Koga, the wolf guy. Inuyasha. It's the exact same thing, really. I can totally see why girls would be into this, besides just the stuff that we've talked about on the podcast, where we've talked about, vampires represent the danger and the mystery of sex in and of itself. But I think also girls are just really attracted to kind of that sort of feral protectiveness, that just innate desire to own and protect. I mean, I've read some Inuyasha fan fiction, and I know exactly. I've never written Inuyasha fan fiction actually, but I totally know what they're going for here and why it appeals so strongly to young women.
Do you attempt to eat your men, or do you want your men to attempt to eat you?
No, and I don't think that Twilight fans especially want that in their real lives either. I think that what you like in a fantasy and what you fantasize about happening to you is not necessarily what you want to have happen to you in reality.
But something so incredibly dangerous that the person's desire to not hurt you is an act of great love.
Yeah, well, and that's part of the taboo that I think even makes yaoi popular. Is that the guys have to get over the societal dislike of homosexuality more often than not, and just the very fact that they get together at all is a sign of their great attraction and love for one another.
So it's the societal convention they're breaking that vampires don't eat things they're attracted to that makes this taboo.
What?
No. So it's taboo because he wants to eat her and he's not eating her. I do not follow your...
Alright, I think we're done. Twilight manga. If you're really, really a sucker for that kind of love triangle, really kind of cheesy soap opera romance, the stuff that happens in Inuyasha, Vampire Night, that kind of thing, you actually could enjoy Twilight.
It wasn't terrible, but I will say, wait for paperback.
Yeah.
If it could be a little cheaper, it wouldn't...
Yeah, I would pay $20 for it, but you know what? I bet it would get cheaper on Amazon.
Mm-hmm, indeed. Twilight manga. Blah.